Good morning. The committee will come to order. Before we begin today's hearing, I want to take a moment to remember one of our colleagues. On July 20th, our friend and fellow member of this committee, Congressman Mark Takai, passed away. Mark spent much of the past year undergoing treatment for cancer, but he still managed to serve his constituents with dedication and enthusiasm, and every time we saw him, he had a smile on his face. He was ranking member of the Subcommittee on Contracting and the Workforce, where he did a lot of great work for the people and small businesses of Hawaii and for the whole country, for that matter. His presence and Aloha spirits will be greatly missed by all of us. And I'd now like to yield to our ranking member, Ms. Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding and affording me a few minutes to remember our friend and colleague, Mark Takai. Mark was a valued member of this committee. As a subcommittee ranking member, he made numerous valuable policy contributions in the area of contracting. Because of his tireless efforts, Native Hawaiian organizations are now eligible to participate in the HUBZone program. He was a strong advocate for working families, and he represented Hawaii with distinction. Perhaps most of all, he will be remembered as a devoted father and husband and dedicated family man. I personally will remember his warmth, kindness, and friendship. I know we are all praying for and thinking of his wife, Sammy, and his two children, Matthew and Kyla. I will now ask for a moment of silence in remembrance of our friend and distinguished member. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. I yield back.
Thank you very much, ranking member. And Mark Takai will be greatly missed and long remembered by, I think, all the members of this committee and all of Congress. Today, our committee will examine the historically underutilized business zones, or HUBZone program. This program, run by the SBA, seeks to incentivize small business development in economically distressed areas by providing access to government contracting opportunities. We are pleased to welcome back to the committee Mr. Bill Scheer from the Government Accountability Office, GAO, and Mr. John Shiraka from the Small Business Administration, the SBA. Since its inception nearly 20 years ago, the goal of the HUBZone program has been to boost economic growth and business development in the areas of this nation that are most in need. If this goal is to be achieved, the program must operate in the most efficient and effective way possible. In the past few years, GAO has performed several reviews of the program to examine how it is working. Through these reviews, GAO had identified several areas where the program needs to improve. One of the chief concerns identified by GAO, a concern that this committee shares, is making sure that the opportunities provided by the HUBZone program are being utilized by small businesses who actually qualify for the program. The sole source contract awards and 10% evaluation preference provided to HUBZone firms are significant incentives to companies, encouraging them to locate and hire employees in areas of significant need. The HUBZone program cannot fulfill its mission if the opportunities provided by these incentives are being taken by companies that don't actually qualify for the program. In response to their concerns, GAO has put forward several recommendations. Among those recommendations are increased and improved communications between HUBZone firms and the SBA, as well as steps to make it easier to verify information from HUBZone firms. SBA has accepted some of these recommendations, but others have not been adopted. We are here to look at how the HUBZone program has adopted to those recommendations and to examine other ways the program could improve. It is crucial, however, that any efforts to alter or expand the program are made by working through Congress and with this committee. Actions that could change how the program has been run or how effective the program will be must be done in the open with the public debate afforded by the People's Branch. This committee sees on a daily basis the tremendous impact small businesses can have in providing jobs and lifting the economic outlook of an entire community. The HUBZone program is intended to help these small businesses, but can only succeed if the program is run in a way that actually helps the areas most in need. We want to thank our witnesses for being with us here today. We're looking forward to their testimony and also asking questions. And I would now like to yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing. Each year, the federal government buys over $400 billion in goods and services from businesses all over the country. Recognizing the benefit these contracts have on local communities in terms of economic development and job creation, Congress created a small business program aimed directly at helping regions with low employment and incomes. The historically underutilized Business Zone Program provides federal assistance to firms located in economically distressed areas by lowering barriers for entry into the federal marketplace for these firms. Ideally, this will not only provide an incentive for selling goods and services to the government, but also create jobs and bring revenue to these struggling areas. However, since its implementation, the program has faced countless issues, from ensuring that only certified businesses enter the program, to overseeing that businesses maintain their eligibility, to even being able to present evidence that the program is meeting its mission. The SBA has lagged behind from the beginning in meeting these basic tasks. In fact, at one point in time, the certification process was so poorly overseen that the GAO was able to certify fake businesses with principal locations at the Alamo and at a Starbucks down the street from the White House. While GAO's most recent report shows that there have been improvements in the upfront certification process, I am concerned SBA is not doing more to ensure that businesses are adhering to the program's requirements. The recertification process has, for the most part, become a self-certification with little follow-up from SBA. I am eager to hear from today's witnesses on how the program can be reformed to provide sufficient oversight for both initial certification and recertification. Unfortunately, the problems facing the HUBZone program do not end with certification. For many years, the program's portfolio consisted of businesses that were eligible only because of a grandfathering clause. Once this expired and other areas lost their HUBZone designation, close to 6,000 businesses were decertified. SBA's outreach efforts has been unsuccessful in getting new businesses to enter the program, and nearly 90% of HUBZone areas do not have a business participating in the program. This low participation rate has resulted in the failure to meet the 3% prime and 3% subcontracting goals. In fact, the dollars and actions awarded through this program have continually decreased since FY 2008, with only 71,000 actions worth $6.4 billion, or 1.82% of prime contracting dollars awarded to these firms in FY 2015. Even then, the program was vastly underutilized, as only 25% of these actions were awarded through a HUBZone set-aside or sole source contract. It is clear that reforms are needed to get the HUBZone program on track, and today's hearing will provide information needed to guide this committee as we formulate legislation to address these issues. Lastly, I would like to add that one of the primary responsibilities of this committee is to oversee the various programs run by the Small Business Administration. While we have evaluated many of the individual lending programs, we have yet to hold individual hearings on the small business contracting programs, and I hope today is just the first of many hearings held to assess these important programs. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to gaining more insight as to how we can make the HUBZone program more effective in meeting its mission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The ranking member yields back, and if members have opening statements, we'd ask that they be submitted for the record. We've got a couple of veterans before us here today, so I don't have to take a long time explaining our rules. We operate by the 5-minute rule, as you both know, and there's a lighting system to assist you. The green light stays on for 4 minutes, the yellow light 1 minute, and then the red light will come on, and we'd ask you to wrap it up by then, if at all possible. We'll give you a little time if you need a little extra. Then we'll stick to the 5 minutes ourselves and ask some questions, and we'll alternate back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. So I'd now like to formally introduce our two witnesses here today, just briefly. Our first witness today is Mr. William Scheer, who is the Director of Financial Markets and Community Investment Team at the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. In this role, Mr. Scheer has appeared before the committee on a number of occasions, and so we welcome him back today. And our second witness is another familiar face, Mr. John Shiraka, who serves as the SBA's Associate Administrator for Government Contracts and Business Development Office, and included within this office is the Office of the HUBZone Program. So he's the person to talk with about this, and so we welcome you back again as well. And so without further ado, Mr. Scheer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velazquez, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our work on SBA's HUBZone program. Congress established the HUBZone program to stimulate economic development in economically distressed communities. The program provides federal contracting preferences to small businesses located in HUBZone designated areas that also employ residents of the areas. My statement today is based on the key findings in our February 2015 report on SBA's oversight of the HUBZone program and our March 2016 follow-up report on SBA responses to our 2015 recommendations. We met with SBA in July 2016 at SBA's request to discuss SBA's actions in response to our recommendations, and again in August 2016 at our request to further discuss the status of SBA efforts in preparation for this hearing. In addition, we met with SBA officials, including John Shiraka, yesterday, and further information was provided to us on some of the agency's recent actions. Specifically, this testimony discusses, first, how SBA communicates changes in HUBZone designations to firms. Second, SBA's certification and recertification processes for firms. And third, how potential changes to designation criteria could affect HUBZones. First, with respect to how SBA communicates changes in HUBZone designations to firms, in 2015, we found that communications to firms about programmatic changes generally were not specific to affected firms. In response, SBA revised its approval letters to newly certified firms to include information about the consequences of redesignation. But as of August 2016, SBA had not yet implemented changes to help assure all currently certified firms would be notified of changes that could affect their program eligibility. SBA officials recently told us that the agency intended to develop a technology solution by spring of 2017 to help address GAO's recommendation. Second, with respect to SBA's certification and recertification processes for firms, SBA requires all firms seeking certification to provide documentation to show they meet the eligibility requirements, and SBA also conducts site visits at selected firms. However, as we reported in 2015, SBA did not require firms seeking recertification to submit information to verify continued eligibility, and instead generally relied on firms' attestations of continued eligibility. SBA has made changes to its recertification processes, but had not fully addressed our recommendation to implement additional controls for recertification, including criteria for requesting and verifying firm information, and guidance on using a risk-based approach to requesting and verifying firm information that are subject to recertification. Finally, in our 2015 report, we presented statistics on economic conditions in HUBZone qualified, redesignated, and non-HUBZone census tracts, and non-metropolitan areas. We also evaluated potential changes to HUBZone designation criteria that could be designed to provide additional economic benefits to some communities. However, changes that benefit some communities also could, through competitive market processes, reduce activity by HUBZone firms in existing HUBZones. In my written statement, we have included examples based on adjusting criteria for unemployment rates and the potential impact of removing the limit on the number of areas that could qualify as HUBZones pursuant to the definition of qualified census tracts that was in effect at the time we issued our February 2015 report. Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velazquez, this concludes my prepared statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scirocco, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velazquez, and members of the full committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify here today. Before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge your former colleague, Mark Takai, Congressman Mark Takai of Hawaii, who served as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Workforce. Congressman Takai was a great partner with the Small Business Administration, and his presence will be truly missed. Over the past 7 years, the administration, Congress, SBA, and federal agencies have been successful in expanding federal small business contracting opportunities through increased advocacy efforts and improved policies and regulations. As a result, the level of accountability has been raised across the federal government, allowing small businesses to continue to become more agile, innovative, and affordable providers of goods and services. This increased focus has resulted in over $640 billion in federal contracting dollars being awarded to small businesses from fiscal year 2009 to 2015. Of that, $90.7 billion was awarded in FY 2015, which represents an incredible impact to the American economy and drives job creation and support for over 537,000 jobs. Through small business contracting, the federal government acts as a catalyst for small business growth while supporting the economic security of the nation. In 2015, for the third consecutive year, the federal government exceeded the 23% small business prime contracting procurement goal, awarding 25.75% of eligible contracts to small businesses. This is the highest percentage recorded in history. Additionally, the federal government achieved the women-owned small business goal of 5% for the first time in history and achieved the highest percentage ever of contracts awarded to small disadvantaged businesses as well as service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. Over the last few years, the SBA's Office of Government Contracting and Business Development began a variety of streamlining efforts to enhance customer service and reduce the administrative burdens on small businesses. These ongoing efforts include significant improvements in reduced timelines in processing 8A and HUBZone applications, 8A mentor-protege agreements, as well as overhauling the HUBZone, 8A, and WOSB program standard operating procedures. GCBD also invested in IT solutions to improve efficiencies for our interactions with small businesses. To ensure compliance with small business contracting regulations, Administrator Contreras-Sweet authorized the hiring of 10 additional procurement center representatives who have subsequently been hired. SBA has implemented over 25 provisions from the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010 and the National Defense Authorizations Acts of 13, 14, 15, and 16, and is making great progress towards implementing the remaining provisions. Of note, the SBA issued a final rule expanding HUBZone eligibility in areas surrounding base realignment and closure, BRAC areas, qualified disaster areas, as well as allowing Native Hawaiian organizations to own HUBZone firms. We're working closely with the FAR Council to incorporate new regulations into the FAR as quickly as possible. Lastly, SBA issued a final rule implementing the new All Small Business Mentor-Protege program, which was followed by Administrator Contreras-Sweet's approving the new office structure and processes for the program. With these important steps, the new All Small Business Mentor-Protege program is on track to begin accepting applications on 1st of October. As we continue to support and improve contracting opportunities for small business, there are always opportunities to build on our strength and improve in certain areas. We are aware of the 2 open GAO recommendations and 2 OIG recommendations associated with the HUBZone program that we are actively working to resolve. In particular, we have maintained open communications and engagement with the GAO and believe we are nearing closure of these recommendations. In general, the HUBZone contracting program serves as an economic development tool that encourages small businesses to locate, invest, and hire employees from economically disadvantaged areas of the United States. As an agency, we work tirelessly to educate the small business and procurement communities about the HUBZone program in order to encourage firms to seek certification, help agency buyers utilize the program, and show economic development entities how the program's benefits can be used to attract small businesses to their areas. Despite limited resources, the program has been successful in its efforts to ensure its mission is achieved. For example, the HUBZone program has implemented a sustainable plan to process applications within a 90-day period. We have also successfully conducted site visits to 10% of the firms in the portfolio, with 87% of those site visits finding firms that are in compliance. In addition, the program has increased education and outreach through the second year of the Destination Hub initiative by visiting 15 cities and encouraging small businesses to seek federal contracting opportunities. Moreover, the SBA recently conducted an in-depth analysis of the legislative and regulatory history of the program to determine if it had the authority to remove the 20% population cap to positively impact additional areas. Our analysis confirmed that the SBA did have the authority to remove the cap and subsequently did so, increasing the number of census tracts in the HUBZone program. Due to the removal of the cap, Puerto Rico saw the largest increase of 516 new designated HUBZone areas. We're committed to continuous improvement in the HUBZone program, along with the SBA's other certification and contracting programs. Our goal is to remove unnecessary burdens placed on the small businesses that have no merit, as our mission is to ensure that responsible small businesses have the maximum practicable opportunity to compete for and win contracts with the federal government. In closing, I would like to recognize this committee's commitment to small business and for being a partner in advancing positive small business practices across the federal marketplace. I would also like to acknowledge the administration and federal agencies for their dedication to providing meaningful contracting opportunities to the small business community. Led by Administrator Contreras-Sweet, we will continue to fight for small businesses and advocate on their behalf. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Now I recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the questions. Before I ask my first question, I was just looking at our names and it just hit me. Shear, Shiraka, Chabot. Sounds like a impressive law firm or something, doesn't it? Or a new disease to be avoided or something. But in any event, I'll get on to my questions. Mr. Shear, I'll begin with you. Through your reviews, what have you seen as being the specific problems with the current HUBZone certification tracking system? And what would be some of the features of a new system that would correct these problems?
We have, I'll mention especially the 2015 report, have had extensive experience with using the HUBZone certification tracking system itself. And I'm very thankful to John and his staff in terms of helping us conduct that analysis. It's this relational data set that is really inadequate, not just, in terms of how hard it was for us to go through these hypothetical scenarios and to look at certain characteristics of firms, but in terms of two things that is part of what SBA is trying to achieve. It is very bad in terms of looking at queries. You can look at one firm at a time, but to do queries that you would want to have to establish a risk-based oversight system in terms of for recertification, it has inadequacies there because of the failure, because it is just so difficult to have queries of that. And in terms of trying to evaluate impacts, looking at characteristics of firms and how much they may be benefiting or not benefiting from participation in the program, it's very difficult because of this data system. So I think that SBA is at least pointed in the direction of developing a new system is something that is a good idea.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Schrock, I'll turn to you now. When did discussions begin on the idea of ignoring the 20% cap for qualified census tracts?
Thank you for that question. As I mentioned in my testimony, sir, we began analyzing the potential impact of removing the cap, I would say probably 6 to 9 months ago. And the discussion centered around the fact that The caps are included in the analysis by Housing and Urban Development for the purposes of the IRS. We found no statutory reason why those caps were included for the HUBZone program. Based on our general counsel's review of our statute and analysis that we had authority to move forward in removing the caps, we went ahead and did that because we would expand the program exponentially to deserving communities that could benefit from participating in the program. Specifically, I think the largest impact was in Puerto Rico, and obviously this is an area that both the administration and the Hill is interested in helping.
Well, let me follow up on my question. You talked about expanding, and I agree, it could potentially dramatically expand the program. But blowing past the 20% cap could result in potentially thousands of new hub zones, and arguably perhaps weaken its effectiveness and perhaps some of the existing hub zones themselves. And what makes you all think that the SBA is able to take this step without congressional action? How can you do that on your own?
I would have to defer to our Office of General Counsel, who provided an opinion to my office with that respect, and we have shared it with the Hill, and in fact, I think we've shared it with GAO as well. But the analysis that I have seen with our recommendations from our General Counsel is that the statute and the calculation performed by the HUD, when they put that 20% cap on, it is specifically for the purposes of the IRS and not for our purposes.
Okay, well, if you could get that to us, we'd like to take a look at that. Thank you very much. Let me go back to you, Mr. Scher. Have there been other challenges within the HUBZone program that you've seen but haven't had the time or opportunity yet to highlight today? Are there other things that you would want to point out?
I would think I would want to point out, like, with respect to, I know this committee taking a leadership role in terms of the legislation for Puerto Rico. I'll paraphrase this: the Puerto Rico, Economic Stabilization Act. That I think that the questions that you're asking in the first mandate, which we plan to staff in the next month and proceed earnestly with, as far as looking at contracting activity in Puerto Rico, looking at expansion in the HUBZone qualified areas, and to try to bring analysis to try to look at what types of shifts are being brought about by expanding, what kinds of, what are the impacts of contracting? Because we can look back to 2008, where after a error made in the HUBZone map for Puerto Rico was corrected, we identified it during our 2008 audit. There was much of Puerto Rico was classified as HUBZone in 2008 due to this error, and once it was corrected, a small part of Puerto Rico. So we would look in the opposite. So the opportunity to evaluate that, and it's not just looking at number of HUBZone firms and HUBZone contracts. It's looking at HUBZones and small businesses and what dynamic is going on in that community in Puerto Rico to try to establish what the impact could be, so that the Congress and SBA, I think we all want to make sure that they're informed choices as far as in bringing up the issue you had, as far as could expanding cause some of the existing HUBZone areas to suffer.
Yeah.
I think those are very important issues to look at.
Excellent.
So
Thank you very much.
I'm glad that we can start that.
Okay, thank you very much. My time's expired. The rank member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scheer, let's go back again to, what provided the path to lift the cap in Puerto Rico. It was an action of Congress. It was by passing PROMESA.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, has GAO analyzed whether or not SBA exceeded its authority when they removed the cap without congressional authorization. I think that's the question here. And then further, how a program that since the first GAO report in 2008 and then 2010 clearly demonstrated that there were not oversight mechanism in place in SBA to prevent the program from being abused. And we have seen the abuse, mismanagement of the program, and also the fact that there is an issue with the type of communication between SBA and the firms and the information that they provided. So have you analyzed that? When
Let me
I know that you provided GAO with information regarding the opinion that was provided by your legal counsel. When did it happen? When did it happen?
When did we provide the,
the
I
legal.
think that was just recently, if I'm,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken.
Have you had any opportunity to analyze it?
Yeah.
And
Can I go
determine-
through to
Sure.
starting with,
Yes.
you asked a multi-part question, and please help me through this, okay? But the first one is the question of the decision to lift the cap.
Yes.
When we started preparing for this hearing, and also starting to gear up to start our work in response to the first mandate dealing with Puerto Rico, we started looking for information about HUBZone and Puerto Rico, and that was roughly 2 weeks ago. And we identified the press release that on June 15th, SBA had lifted the cap for Puerto Rico, and that was kind of the headline. Then, when we read it, we saw that it was lifted nationwide. And our shock was that we had just had a meeting with SBA where we said, are there any other significant changes to the program? And this was never mentioned.
Mr. Shiroka, do you consider that a big change when he
well,
asked you whether or not there had been any policy changes?
Ma'am, I would consider the fact that we issued a press release completely open discussion. This is nothing.
But you
that we
had
were-
a meeting, SBA.
I don't
and,
know that I was in that particular meeting, but that's nothing that we have intended to hide from anybody, ma'am. We did a press release, we did events around the country. Our director of HUBZone, in fact, was in Puerto Rico and discussed the impact to Puerto Rico with respect to the removal of the cap. This was all done in June, and it, quite frankly, it was done to make sure that our HUBZone program impacts the deserving communities that it should be impacting.
I understand, and that is the intent of this committee, and this is why we're doing this type of hearings. But since 2008, you know that different investigation has been conducted, and ineligible firms have been participated within the program. And still, the oversight mechanisms and the metrics that are so needed for us to be able to fix the program has not been provided.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So as you are aware, a full front-end certification was put in place in 2009 and 10. And because of that full front-end certification, I mean, we get sort of the discussion on both sides, right? We get the question with respect to firms who oftentimes complain because of the time it takes to have them certified. And quite frankly, it has to be a balancing act. So we have implemented a full front-end certification process that sometimes is considered overly onerous. And quite frankly, over the last several years, over the last 2 years, we've looked at how do we remove some of those burdens. Because in my opinion, our programs are targeted towards some of the most underserved communities, which a lot of times don't have the resources to be able to put applications together that are, 2 pounds of paper. So we're looking for opportunities to reduce the burden on those firms, and it has to be a balancing act. Sometimes we increase risk, but we reduce the burden on our firms.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, we are going to be looking at ways to improve the program. That might need congressional action. So I just want to be on record asking that you provide the committee with the type of reforms that you consider are needed to make this program effective so that those deserving communities get the benefit of the program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, who is Vice Chairman of this committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on ranking member's comments and about the 20% situation here. Mr. Shiraka, whenever you did this, are you continuing to fall under the same guidelines that HUD had with regards to percent of household incomes, that sort of stuff? You're just taking a community that normally would be restricted to 20%, but still falls under the guidelines and expanding it to 30% or 40%. What is the largest that you've expanded to at this point?
So just to explain, the Housing and Urban Development actually performs this analysis, and for the reasons of other programs, puts a 20% population concentration cap.
Right.
What we have determined is that cap is not relevant or goes to the intent of this program because it reduces the communities that can participate in this program.
Right.
So we have actually removed that cap in our calculations. So we are not changing any of the calculations that Housing and Urban Development does and has done and continues to do for us. They put an additional cap for other program purposes, a 20% population cap. We take that away because we feel that it doesn't go to the intent of the HUBZone program.
So what percentage of the community then are you allowing to participate in this program?
So it
You're
hasn't.
limited- It's originally, the program understands is 20% of the community, right?
It's a population concentration cap. In other words, if more than 20% of the population is below the poverty line, then the cap is in place. And I can certainly get you specifics with response to how this has impacted the communities. What I mentioned in my testimony is that in Puerto Rico, we increased the HUBZone areas from 27% of the census tracts to close to 87% of the census tracts.
Okay.
And we have the calculations by state, and I'm happy to share that with you.
Okay, so instead of taking 20% of the community, now you're taking 87% of the community in. That's a census tract, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what is your anticipated amount of extra workload that you're looking at here? Have you thought about that?
One of the things that's an excellent question.
I'm not
sir.
against the competition here that this would encourage.
Right.
What I'm looking at is your ability to maintain control, because Mr. Shear's going to come in here 2 years from now and say, hey, these guys expanded the program, have no idea what's going on. They can't go back and do visits because you're in here, you're limited to 10% or whatever, which is way too low in my mind.
Right. That's
and then you're not able to control these things, and suddenly we have ineligible businesses in this program, which defeats the whole purpose of what's going on.
That's an excellent question, sir. Thank you. We actually have lost over a third of our portfolio because of the census tract redesignations of the 2010 census. So we lost over 2/3, and we're down near about 5,000 firms in the portfolio, where we were historically up around 8,000 or 9,000. Since then, we have sort of leveled out at the right under 4,000 firms in the portfolio. What we have been attempting to do over the last 2 to 3 years is actually, through our Destination Hub initiative, trying to increase the number of firms. We have the capacity, and as Mr. Shears mentioned, we're developing the technology to be able to make sure that the deserving firms do participate in our program.
My time is running out. I want Mr. Shear to comment on this. Mr. Shear, do you believe that this expansion is going to undermine the program from the standpoint of expanding it beyond what the intent of it was to help businesses in this area to be able to compete? And question number one. Number two, will they have they got the controls in place yet, or are they putting controls in place that you believe are going to be adequate to monitor this program, this expansion?
Let me just try to do it real briefly.
Yeah, I got
in
10
terms
seconds left.
Okay, well, I'll take 10 seconds if it's okay. But the first one, in terms of the expansion of the program, I can't sit here and say that the new communities, whether they be counties or census tracts that comprise a community in Puerto Rico, are not deserving. But what we're looking for is kind of like some evaluation. You know, even putting the legal issues aside, does SBA have statutory authority as far as what would the impact be here? Because one of the things that we can point out from our analysis in our 2015 report and in his testimony, that you do observe that hub zones have worse economic conditions in the redesignated areas. And as you expand, you're tending to move up kind of like the ladder to areas that might not be as economically
that's the
depressed.
heart of my question. Are we undermining the purpose of HUBZone?
Well,
I'm not against it. I'm just kind of, are we going too
what
far?
we're looking for and what we're going to try to address in a mandate from this committee with Puerto Rico, and we'll probably look more broadly than Puerto Rico, but certainly for Puerto Rico, as we've been mandated, is to look at the question is what happens on the ground when you expand the program in this fashion. There should be some type of informed analysis that goes behind an informed decision, regardless of what the statutory authority is. And to us, an opposite question that we'll be looking at in terms of a before and after analysis is what happened in 2008 when there was a sharp contraction in Puerto Rico. We'll be looking, what were the impacts of that action? So we think that you really need informed consent here. As far as the oversight of the program, it expands the pieces, but we're not in a position to say what happens as far as SBA's ability to oversee the program. It's clear that, you know, if you keep the number of site visits about the same, that'll be a smaller percentage of your overall universe. But, you know, in addition to that kind of simple point, I don't think I have much to really offer on that point.
The
I
gentleman's time's
I
expired.
appreciate the chairman's indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, who is a ranking member of the Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, on one hand, there are instances of these ineligible firms that have been certified for the HUBZone. On the other hand, there are these vast areas that do not have HUBZone certified firms operated within them. In fact, when researching this, I found that while my district has pockets of census tracts that would qualify for HUBZone status, there are only 2 HUBZone certified firms in the entire area. I understand that across the country, there are only 5,600 participants in the HUBZone program, and nearly 90% of HUBZones do not have a single certified firm. So can you tell me, for the panel, can you tell us why you believe that the program is not being utilized in certain areas? Yes, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I think the HUBZone program is unique in many instances, right? So there are certain requirements that sometimes can be complicated for small businesses to maintain. One is their primary office has to be in a HUBZone. That means most of their employees, the largest percentage of their employees actually work out of that office. Another is that 35% of their staff have to reside in a HUBZone. Maybe not that same HUBZone, but in a HUBZone. So oftentimes when we have talked to firms, they have talked about the difficulty of being able to maintain those requirements, especially as they get contracts and they begin to grow. So the challenge is, quite frankly, it's a unique and different program. A lot of times firms will fall in and out of compliance with the program. And quite frankly, contracting officers have a hesitancy to use the program sometimes because of these unique differences. We have in the last several rules that we have promulgated, if that's the right word, I apologize. We have implemented measures to put the HUBZone program in at the same level with our other programs. When it comes to, this is kind of in the weeds, when it comes to non-manufacturing rule waivers, or when it comes to limitations on subcontracting, these were differences in the program that were not the same as the WSB program or the service disabled program. So I think I think it's twofold. One is, quite frankly, it's a unique and challenging program. So firms are sometimes reluctant to take advantage of it. I think we need more training with contracting officers to encourage them to take the program seriously. And lastly, I think this is a great opportunity to look at the statute to see where we can add some level of continuity or comfort or consistency with firms falling in and out of program requirements.
Mr. Scheer?
I think you're asking an excellent question. I think John Chiraka gave a very good answer of the challenges of HUBZone firms face, and therefore what can affect their participation in the program. One of the things that I'd like to emphasize, which goes to our first recommendation, is the ability to communicate with firms and to provide firms information that makes it easier for them to navigate how changes in the program can affect their status. I think that, you know, we heard and we reached out to the HUBZone community as such, and we just found that there's, it's kind of expecting too much of the firms with the current state there. So that's one thing that I would want to emphasize. The other thing that I'd want to emphasize is to be very mindful of a trade-off when the solution that's offered is to kind of like allow firms to stay in the program that may no longer be eligible. We're very sympathetic with the idea that firms can be very challenged if based on short-term swings in economic conditions, they're in and they're out and they're in. It is a concern of the program, and it might be something that this committee might want to look at more closely, or have SBA and GAO look at more closely. Is that there's a challenge created there, but what I'd emphasize by our analysis of characteristics of HUBZone areas compared with those that have lost designation and those that aren't hub zones is that if you make the window too wide, you're undermining the purpose of the program, which is to serve the most economically depressed areas in our country.
The gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Knight, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the challenges with the HUBZone program were first identified by the GAO years ago and have persisted. From your knowledge of what SBA is now doing to address these challenges, do you believe they will be resolved soon? And can you tell us some of the methods that are being used to resolve these? Mr. Scheer.
Yeah, thank you. As I stated, certainly with the certification process, SBA has improved. When we started our audit in 2008, we concluded at the end that there was just a complete lack of internal control, but we had concluded that very early on, and we were the ones that reached out to our fraud investigators. So the program has definitely improved since that situation that we evaluated in 2008. What remains now, I think, is challenging. One is how to deal with firms that are dealing with the complexities of a program. It's trying to do something geographically where you're talking about a very dynamic environment. Businesses change over time, and the economic conditions of census tracts and counties change over time. So I think that this idea of looking to a technology solution cannot solve these problems by themselves. But the idea is implementing better technology to address concerns about how to notify firms, how to conduct the recertification process, how to have risk-based approach to oversight. These things are very important. So, I mean, at GAO, we're very good at asking questions. We've observed that SBA has had trouble implementing technology. A number of years ago, we were all talking about OneTrack, which was going to be the solution for the 8A program and the HUBZone program. and it wasn't a successful investment. So our concerns about is coming up with a real specific plan for how to use the technology, then what resources have to be used, have to be available from SBA for a more manual process even after the technology is in place. And I think those are the challenges that are out there.
And I understand that. I come from one of the fastest growing areas in the country. And in fact, we lead the country when our economy is expanding and we're growing at a good rate. Always reaching out and making sure of the new programs and making sure that we're giving the most information is one of the hardest things for either one of us who represents these areas or one of you who is trying to reach out to the firms or to the businesses. It is always the biggest challenge in making sure they're getting the right information. Can you tell me, over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, as the advent of new type of innovative ways to reach out, have you found one that has done more than others, or have you found that just the same kind of walking, doing the site visits, doing all those types of things are still the most important thing? Sure. And
Yeah,
both of them.
there's part of it is that certainly using technology and electronic transmission can help, whether it be webinars from a training standpoint or whether it be of sending notifications to firms that are meaningful about what they have to know to make sure they're compliant with a program and can manage it. So there has to be a mix there, but part of this that I'd say is really a manual process and requires some interaction, and this is where SBA's district offices, I would think, would want to be involved in reaching out to the various parts of the country where hub zones are present.
Thank you very much.
If I just may real quick
Sure.
on that, I think one of the things that we've done, in addition to sort of looking at the SBA 1 and making sure that the new system that should be launched by March of 2017 accounts for this communication, is to ensure that all new hub zones, hub zone firms, subscribe to the newsletter, which is put out regularly to inform them of changes in the designation. And it is a requirement, and I think this is absolutely correct. Not only do you have to monitor the hub zones with respect to your principal office, but you have to monitor hub zones with respect to your employees and where they reside. And so having an automated system to be able to do that for you and your staff, it would alleviate a lot of the burdens that are now manual.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Hahn, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just start by saying thank you to you and the ranking member for taking a moment before we started today to remember our colleague, Mark Takai. I would consider him a friend of mine. He actually lived in my building here in D.C. and actually was on the same floor that I was, so I ran into him and his wife and his kids many times. One of my fondest memories was during the cherry blossom season. I've been here for 5 years. I never had made it down to the tidal basin to actually see the cherry blossoms. He invited me, he and his wife invited me to join them, so that was just like April. And I spent about an hour and a half with them down at the tidal basin. He took these great photos of me, and I took great photos of him, and I'm really going to miss Mark. In a short period of time here in Congress, he really made his mark and made a lot of friends, and it seemed like he got more done in like 18 months than I think a lot of people have in much longer careers. So we'll miss him, but thanks for taking the time to honor him this morning. So I'm going to talk about technology as well, Mr. Shiraka. Apparently the map of the eligible hub zones it seems to have had continuous problems. And even back in the Bush administration, GAO noted serious issues with the map and recommended that it be updated regularly to ensure its accuracy. So when my staff, my millennials, accessed the map, they noticed it was really extremely difficult to use and not very high tech. When the map is zoomed out, it does not appear to show any eligible zones for Los Angeles County, where my district is located. You have to zoom in a considerable amount to see the zones in my district. And when the map is accessed using a smartphone, it's apparently even more difficult. So what can you tell me that SBA is doing to make this map more user-friendly? And do we have any plans on making it
Sure.
more of a mobile-friendly app, particularly for
Absolutely.
smartphone users?
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. You're absolutely correct. This is a technology that is outdated and has lived its life. We recently engaged a vendor not only to address the certification module, the HUBZone certification module, but also the mapping module. And they will begin work on it in earnest this month. And as I mentioned earlier, by March of 2017, we should have at least an initial module out on the program. What we try to do is, with respect to changes in the program and the changes in the maps, the data that is out there that changes either economic information or unemployment information sometimes is updated monthly, right? We collect that data and issue changes either to the qualified census tract or the non-metropolitan areas on an annual basis. And we do have a vendor that uploads this data and adjusts the maps. But as you have mentioned, that is an outdated map and is not as user-friendly as one would hope. And we are trying to address that in the next
What's the
6 to
timeline
9
for that?
months. We hope to have, as I said, a revised mapping system and HUBZone certification system by March of 2017.
So it's one thing for it to be, not user-friendly. It's another thing to actually cost someone their job, which is what happened to a business in my district. They had to let an employee go because the map showed the employee did not reside within the hub zone, and therefore the business wasn't going to meet their 35% residential requirement. Later, the business found this to be an error on the map. However, this was after the employee lost their job. So again, it's one thing for it to not be user-friendly. It's another thing for it to contain errors that actually would cost somebody their job. That was very disturbing when I found that out.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention, first off. But one is, we always encourage the firms, as Mr. Shears mentioned, to work with our local district offices in situations like that so they're absolutely sure what the data is. And the second is, as we update the maps, anytime there are changes, we also upload a much more manual process of spreadsheets that have census tracts and zip codes. So we direct businesses, small businesses, to those as well to double check the accuracy of the map. But I think this is something that we need to work with our district offices to make sure that we're available to the firms where there are questions around.
Yeah, let's pay attention to this.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Thank you. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you witnesses for being here. The whole purpose of the HUBZone is to spread this type of help to small businesses across the entirety. And although I'm happy that Puerto Rico is getting a great share of this, I'm more concerned with the counties in my Mississippi area that need it the most. But by expanding, you're taking away from the folks who I have that need it. So what it sounds to me like is the whole purpose is to spread the wealth so that not one area gets all the help. But it sounds to me like when you do away with the 20% rule, what you've effectively done is decide you get to say who gets help and who doesn't get help. And that is not the purpose. I'm really concerned when Congress passes a law and they write in what they mean, that people interpret that they don't think that's what Congress meant. And so you said that you have the numbers for other states and other areas that are affected. So Mr. Shiraka, I ask you, what is the effect in Mississippi in all 4 of my congressional districts, my 1st district and the other 3 districts in my state that need it the most?
Thank you, sir. 2 points. One is I don't have the numbers for your district in front of me, but I certainly will share that with you after the hearing. There were an additional 2,015 census tracts that were qualified as hub zones across the country. Every state saw an impact. It wasn't a pick or choose decision. The QCTs, which are by statute what we have to use, is what we continue to use. We're not stopping using the QCTs as put out by HUD. What we did is not include the additional step that they take to put the 20% cap on. There were significant impacts in all of the states, the most significant being Puerto Rico, but certainly I know off the top of my head that there was an impact in Mississippi, but I don't know the exact numbers, and we'd be happy to share those with you, sir.
I wanted to say that Mark Takai, when I first got here, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having that moment of silence. When I first got here, he's a guy on the other side of the aisle from me, but we both have a common bond of serving in the National Guard, he in Hawaii and I in Mississippi. And one of the first things when I first got here as a new guy, he walked up to me and said aloha and set up an office visit to take care of me, to make sure as a fella, battle buddy and guardsman and soldier, that he took care of me. And what a gentleman, and I thank you for having that moment of silence, Mr. Chairman. The statutory definition of qualified census tract is no more than 20% of a single metro area can be designated as a hub zone. My concern is, like I said earlier, is that it's going to take away from the areas with the most need. There's only X amount of resources that are allocated. So if you allow more than 20%, if you expand that area and you put more resources into one area and there's only X amount of resources, that by definition means that you have to take it away. And one of the other things that I heard you say is that you didn't think it was a big thing when Mr. Scheer said, we asked were there any other big things. And obviously it's a big thing if you have a press conference. As a former DA, I didn't hold a press conference when it was something that was small. I held press conferences for something that I deemed to be big. So the fact that you have a press conference, to me, by definition, says that it was big. And right after he asked you, were there any other big changes, it was not responded to. I think we have to be very careful that we allow the Congress to pass things and not usurp Article I authority or any other article authority. And I think we're doing that right now to delegate. Mr. Shiraka, do you not think that that's what you're doing, is designating these assets and resources that are limited to the areas that you think are most important?
Sir, again, we'd be happy to share with you the legal analysis that we received from our Office of General Counsel. Their opinion was that we did have the authority to not use the additional steps performed by HUD for other program purposes. It wasn't a picking or choosing of where the impact would be made. It had an impact on every state. And the other thing that I'll point out is that we have had a situation where we have been trying to recruit additional firms into the program, where we were at a portfolio of 8,000 or 9,000. We're at
I'm sorry, I got 15 seconds. I want to get this in.
Sure.
Just the one thing I'll caution you of, it's easier to serve urban areas because they're closer together. But the whole purpose of this is to serve rural areas, and it's harder and more expensive. So when you focus on one large urban area with a larger population, you leave out the people who need it the most, which are the rural areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, is recognized for 5 minutes. I've been misinformed by my crack staff, so let me get the right one here. We'll go to the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Adams.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very
Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez. Thank my colleague, Ms. Clark, for making that notation. And gentlemen, thank you for being here. And I certainly want to add my words of commendation to the late Mark Takai. I lived in the same building as well and met him regularly in the mornings downstairs in the lobby as he was waiting to be picked up. And we had many conversations along the way. We're certainly going to miss him and his bright smile, but certainly a tribute to all of the work that he did for the people that he served. And I just wanted to add my words of thanks and appreciation to him. The HUBZone program is critically important in encouraging small businesses to build and and operate in economically disadvantaged communities across our country. I do have a few questions, and I want to start with Administrator Soroka. If you could just walk us through the certification process for small businesses looking to become part of the HUBZone program, I'd appreciate that.
As I mentioned before, there are a number of requirements to become HUBZone certified. And as a result, quite frankly, of the findings in 2008 and 9 of GAO, the program did become a full front-end certification program. So the primary office for the HUBZone firm needs to be in a HUBZone area. And by that means that the largest percentage of staff work in that office. And then 35% of your employees need to also reside in a HUBZone area. Again, not the same HUBZone area, but in a designated HUBZone area.
Okay, so what about the recertification process, and if you could identify some of the inefficiencies that exist within the process?
Thank you for that question. One of the things that we've identified both in the 8A program and the HUBZone program, quite frankly, in making sure that we are customer friendly is the overly burdensome requirements in some of our recertification or annual review processes. So we did put a team together to look at how we're recertifying both 8A and HUBZone companies, and how can we reduce the burden on some of the smallest firms, some of the most deserving firms in the country. So one of the things that we did, and this is a discussion we've had with GAO, is to streamline the recertification process for the HUBZone, quite frankly for both, but for the HUBZone companies, so that they don't drop out of the program just because if it's a overly burdensome process. Now, they recertified that they continue to meet the requirements of the program with the risk or at risk of perjuring themselves. So when they recertify, they sign at risk of perjuring themselves. When we find a bad actor, and we've done this a number of times, we've had more suspensions, debarments, and proposed suspensions and debarments in the last 4 years than the previous decade. When we find a bad actor, we move quickly to get them out of federal contracting. But our intent is to make our programs as user-friendly as possible. When we talk about risk-based analysis, when we do our site visits, the 10%, we look at not just any firm in the HUBZone program, we look at who's receiving contracts. That is where the risks exist, right? They're receiving benefits. Benefits are flowing to a recipient. As I'm sure you would agree, we would want the benefits to flow to the intended recipients. So our site visits oftentimes are determined on where contracts are going. And again, those site visits have documented an 87% of the firms meeting the requirements of the program. And lastly, I don't want to take too long, but lastly, we have the entire protest function. So if either a contracting officer or the SBA or a interested party, like the second runner-up in a contract, feels that that winner didn't meet the requirements of being a HUBZone, they can file a protest, and that's when we will review all the documentation to make sure that indeed they meet the requirements of the program.
Thank you, and maybe, Mr. Scheer, can someone speak to how the program services businesses in rural versus the urban areas and the challenges that exist there?
It's a great question, and so for us, part of the concern, I agree with John Chiraka that the biggest element of risk in the program, in certification, recertification, are those that are getting contracts. But nonetheless, when you start talking about the inability to really provide specific information about designations that affect firms. You know, it isn't like we focused in on rural areas, but it was one place where we would just presume that in rural areas it is more difficult to deal with that situation. In terms of our work looking at hypothetical changes, and part of this was concern from rural areas where unemployment rates are used to determine whether the area is eligible or not in these large counties is that we went through a scenario that said, well, what would happen if instead of using a 1 year, unemployment rate for the 1 year, if we said, let's look at the average unemployment rate over longer periods of time. That is very much has a rural focus to it. So it is something that in rural areas it can be more problematic when you can't give specific advice about whether your county is going to remain in the program.
All right, thank you,
Gentlemen.
sir. I'm out of time, and I
Thank you.
apologize, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. And I have a couple basic questions on metrics. So how, Mr. Shiraka, how do you measure the success of the program?
I think for us right now, one of the, obviously the base metric is the percentage that we're held accountable to as a federal government, the 3% goal, which is a statutory goal on prime and subcontracts. And when you look at that, quite frankly, because of the firms that we lost, because of the redesignation of the census change in 2010, we lost a third of the portfolio. And so when we came close to meeting that number in 2009, it has quite frankly been a challenge. We hit 1.82% last year. So that is an area that the federal government can improve on, and that's an area where we've done
So
the destination
participation, I mean, simply participating in the program success, what are the economic benefits of the program? I mean, clearly there's benefits to the firm that get the contracts, but are there costs to the federal? I mean, we're basically getting a 10% cost preference in contracting. So does that really result in the government paying 10% more for the things they buy from that 3% of firms? Or is there a cost or savings? Have you measured that?
That's an area that we as an agency have not looked at, quite frankly. And when Congresswoman Velasquez also talked about the impact to the communities, that's an area where we have had difficulty in being able to analyze, are there a good number of firms, HUBZone firms in this community, and what is the impact or the economic impact? Now, obviously, if an area was a HUBZone and then because of economic data no longer is a HUBZone, one would assume that good economic things have occurred. Unemployment went down. But can we really correlate that to the HUBZone firms or the fact that that area was a HUBZone? That's been a difficult challenge for us to be able to determine.
Right. Thanks for that. And then how much does the HUBZone program cost to administer? Do you allocate cost in your budget in terms of what it costs to
If I'm not mistaken, there's a $3 million, $2.8 million line item for the HUBZone program annually.
And how many people are employed doing that?
18.
18.
Now, that's 18 that do the certification and the recertification. We obviously have district office. We have 68 district offices around the country that help support and educate and do our outreach and recruiting, et cetera. So a portion of their time is dedicated to the HUBZone program, and that doesn't include our sister agencies and all their small business specialists, et cetera, that help to promote the HUBZone program.
Mr. Scheer, would you agree with those conclusions on metrics?
It's a challenge to look at it, and so from our standpoint, it's how do you create benchmarks for what would happen with the absence of HUBZone activity? But nonetheless, after our 2008 report, somebody was hired at SBA. We provided a lot of our time just giving kind of technical support as far as how you could evaluate the program. So it's trying to look at what are the characteristics of different communities that are both hub zones and not hub zones, and trying to make some comparisons to try to benchmark and to see what is the economic impact of the HUBZone program and how might that be affected by how many hub zones, on, again, this basic question. Every community would like to be a hub zone, but every time you add communities, the question is what happens to the existing communities. So, I mean, there's ways that we think that could be used to try to benchmark, and that's what we're going to be attempting to do with our Puerto Rico mandate, but it's
Setting aside
that's
Puerto
a real
Rico, do
challenge.
you have a mandate to do this anywhere, Mr. Shiraka, to actually create? Because here's the concern, right? I disagree. Not every community would want to be a hub zone. They want a good economy. They want good jobs, and they want the opportunities that, by definition, make you not qualified as a hub zone. So it is success to not be a hub zone, frankly. But we're spending money because we want fewer hub zones. You've found a way to increase more hub zones or more places, which flies in the eyes. So for spending the money, what are we getting in return? That's the thing that I think the American people want to know, and certainly in our district where we don't have hub zones, we want to know, hey, what are we getting? We're donating this for a good cause, right?
I think for our part, this is a question, quite frankly, that we have around the 8A program as well. What is the impact of being in the program, and how do we track your success or failure, quite frankly, through that program? The 8A program is a 9-year business development program where we have requirements and quite frankly, statutory requirements to be able to track certain metrics with respect to income and employment, et cetera. With the HUBZone program, as we move into SBA 1, one of the things that we could be discussing on the Hill, quite frankly, is statutory authority to collect some of the metrics around number of employees, revenues, growth, et cetera, that then we can track a firm through their years in the program and be able to report back, much like we do or should
Thank
do
you.
in the 8A
My time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York is recognized. Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our ranking member. Before I begin, I'd like to also thank you for the memoriam to our departed colleague, Mark Takai, and I'd like to offer my condolences to his family, friends, and the staff of Mr. Takai. He was a great man who I enjoyed working with. As Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard stated in her remarks on the House floor yesterday, Mark Takai embodied the spirit of aloha, and I think we all were beneficiaries of that, and he will certainly be missed. But turning to the matter at hand, hub zones are an important tool for revitalizing struggling communities. They incentivize investment in economically disadvantaged communities and provide residents of these communities with the means to support their families. In my district alone, more than 50 census tracts qualify as hub zones in places like Flatbush and Marcus Garvey Village in Brownsville, Brooklyn. However, the program only works and is effective if firms are aware of their eligibility to participate and are recertified in a timely manner. So my question, Mr. Shiraka, is this. SBA has indicated that a lack of resources is a main obstacle for getting rid of the backlogs and allowing the agency to conduct a more in-depth recertification process. Can you give us an idea of how many new hires your department would need to run the HUBZone program efficiently and effectively and at the proper level for internal controls?
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the question. I think when we talk about obviously the number of resources or how many resources the HUBZone or quite frankly the SBA or my office, Government Contracting and Business Development has, I think we always have, any federal manager would argue that I may need more people to be able to get my job done. I think one of the things we've attempted to do is do our job smarter with systems and with technology. And so that's the direction we've moved forward in with respect to SBA 1. And with respect to making sure firms are aware of the program and take advantage of the program, I think that's where, or at least in my opinion, that's where we need to double down on our outreach and education. So we have the Destination Hub event that we have done over 15 events across the country. And one of the unique pieces of Destination Hub, and if we haven't done one in New York, we need to do one, is that we actually sit down with local economic development folks and encourage them to use the HUBZone program as an economic development tool, another tool in their toolkit or tool belt. And so I think it's the question of Obviously, I think every agency has a requirement in this environment to find ways to tighten their belt. But it's how do we leverage our resource partners, our small business development centers, our women's business centers? How do we leverage our stakeholders like the HUBZone Council and other partners in making sure that the word gets out and training is done efficiently and effectively? With respect, to number of employees that may or may not require, I think there'd have to be a much more significant analysis with respect to how, what that number would be.
I want to encourage you to make that analysis simply because the program is a program that holds great promise. And to the extent that we can be targeted and effective in terms of identifying potential businesses that should be accessing it and making sure that there's no abuse on the other side because someone who is far more sophisticated knows how to, work the system, that makes all the difference in the world. And if you don't have the wherewithal to do sort of that balancing act, then we missed the point of the HUBZone program completely. So I want to encourage you to do that analysis. Mr. Scheer, there have been concerns raised regarding data used to determine HUBZone eligibility, and some have called for using different criteria to designate HUBZones. Has GAO looked at how changing the unemployment rate and median household income required to determine HUBZones may affect the success of the program?
Yes, and thank you for the question. In our 2015 report, this was very much, brought forward by our requesters for that work, really wanting a focus on what types of changes could be made and what would be the effect on a number of hub zones. So this is one where I referred earlier. I really appreciate that John and his staff really helping us work with their data system. But we went through a number of scenarios. So the 2015 report that provides part of the basis for my statement, and it can certainly provide the report, for the record. It's GAO-15-234 in Appendix 3. We go through a number of scenarios, such as changes, what would happen, based on at that time, if you had changed some of these provisions. So it's meant to not to say there's a right way to do it, but it gets into some of the concerns, like I just stated with respect to rural areas. What would happen if you went to a longer-term unemployment rate to determine eligibility? Things like what would happen. One of the scenarios we went to at the time was lifting this 20% cap. That's so much the focus, of this hearing. And just other scenarios. What would be the impact of doing that on the number of hub zones and just some of the consequences of that? And we're very mindful that when you shift around which areas get hub zone status, that it can, when you bring in new areas, it has implications for the existing areas, even those that remain in the program.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Thank you. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member. And apologize for being delayed, and I was not here for the commemoration of our colleague, and just like to add my sentiments as well. Mark Takai was a true gentleman and epitomized what a member of Congress should be, and he would be sorely missed, and just knew that he was ill and was going through treatment, but just still have been shocked by the rapid demise of our colleague, and still shocked by it. But he was a good man, and I think that's one of the best things you could say about a person. Mr. Shiraka, we know the HUBZone programs have had issues around fraud. As we've seen, part of the issue may be the certification process. And, since the certification process depends on documentation submitted by the participant businesses, what does the SBA use to verify the information and documentation they're receiving is indeed authentic? And how can the system be improved to curtail the fraud?
So we use various, obviously, third-party sources of data to ensure ownership, residency, et cetera. And there's various documentation that can be used to document principal office residence, like leases or ownership documents, et cetera, as well as corporate structures, right, ownership and control. I think again, one of the challenges that we want to make sure we balance is if we wanted to eliminate all risk in the program, we could, turn off the spigot and accept no applications, and we wouldn't have any risk at all. But that's not what we want. We want to make sure that the program serves the intended recipients. And quite frankly, 99.9% of the program applicants are good actors. Unfortunately, we have 0.01% of people who are bad actors, and it will always continue to be bad actors. But one of the things that I think is critical is that we manage towards the good actors with risk-based analysis, as Mr. Shears has pointed to make sure that we do have backup to analyze the risk to the federal government with respect, again, to where the risks exist. The risk exists when the federal government is giving contracts to these small businesses. One last thing that I'll point to is that with respect to the program and casting a broader net, we have done analysis that documents using the current formulas. That net is significantly smaller than the net was when the program was established. So I think that's another discussion that we have to have jointly with respect to what the intent of the program is. If we look at the analysis of when the program was put in place, the net that was cast is significantly broader than those formulas cast today.
Okay, so you feel that the issue is 0.001
with bad actors. I think there's always going to be bad actors.
Oh, sure, I agree, but I thought the issue was a little more.
I think when you talk about
higher.
Right, but when you talk about $96 billion into the hands of small businesses every year, and I'm not sure what the GAO report, the exact numbers, but I know the numbers sound big, and obviously we want to address fraud, waste, and abuse, but when you talk about $10 million as opposed to $96 billion into the hands of small businesses, that is a fraction of a very small fraction.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shearer, very quickly, you've been looking at this program for a number of years now. Why has the program, remained to be susceptible to fraud?
It's a very good question. I will first start out by something in my statement as far as, when we do our program audit and we're looking at what we call internal controls, that there has been improvement, particularly in the certification process. So the idea that when we looked in 2008, from the start, we said, this looks like a self-certification program, from soup to nuts. It looks that way. So there's been improvement. Our concern, we haven't found evidence of fraud, and we haven't seen the susceptibility to fraud that we've reached out like we did in 2008 and said, we have to have a fraud investigation here. But we do have concerns about the recertification process because of there's a lot of moving parts, the characteristics of the businesses and the characteristics of the counties and census tracts that are defined as hub zones. And so that's where our concern is. And when you have a lack of internal control, that's where our attendance tends to go up in terms of saying we're concerned about fraud. And it's hard to forget about fraud when we go think of the experience we had, you know, even though it was 8 years ago, the experience we had evaluating and conducting fraud investigations of this program. So we're always mindful of that.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired, but the reason I asked the question is because, you know, the committee has nothing but goodwill towards small businesses. It is our mission, but there are other members that always look for an issue around fraud to curtail the type of work that we're trying to do for small businesses. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman's time's expired. We'd like to thank both our witnesses for being here with us today. I think the importance of the HUBZone program and the concerns that some members had are reflected by the heavy attendance that we saw really on both sides of the aisle here today, with I thought a lot of good questions. The SBA's HUBZone program began with a goal of promoting economic growth by incentivizing small businesses to locate in areas most in need. This cannot be achieved, however, unless the program is properly managed and the benefits are not being taken up by non-qualified firms. The work GAO has done to identify specific ways in which programs should be improved has been invaluable, I think, to this committee, and I would urge the SBA to take immediate steps to fully adopt all of the recommendations of the GAO. And we owe it to America's small businesses and America's taxpayers to ensure that the opportunities provided by the HUBZone program are utilized in the most efficient way possible. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.